Montana Territory, 1878. The thunder of hooves shattered the pre-dawn stillness of Blackwood Valley, echoing off the snow-capped peaks that loomed over Eleanor Mitchell's horse farm. Through the darkness, a harsh whisper carried on the wind. "Take them all, and remember, no witnesses." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. What the McGregor gang didn't know, what would soon become their fatal mistake, was that the slender figure watching from the shadowed farmhouse window was far more than just another grieving widow trying to keep her late husband's dream alive. For nearly 2 decades, Eleanor Mitchell had been the most feared bounty hunter west of the Mississippi, known in hushed whispers as the Shadow Rider. A woman who could track a man across 5 territories and bring him in dead or alive. Her choice. The gang thought they'd found an easy target, a remote horse farm run by a woman alone. They were about to learn that they'd just stolen from the deadliest tracker in the West. Eleanor's fingers traced the familiar brass plate on her father's prized Henry rifle as she watched them lead her horses away. Most precious among them was Mercury, a silver dapple stallion that represented everything she'd built since hanging up her bounty hunting days. The horse was more than just an animal. He was the last gift from her husband Daniel, before the mountain fever took him too. Winters ago, at 45, Eleanor still moved with the fluid grace that had kept her alive through countless manhunts. Her honey-brown hair, streaked with silver at the temples, was pulled back in a tight braid, and her hazel eyes tracked the shadows with practiced ease. The worn leather of her gun belt hadn't seen use since she'd married Daniel, but she'd never stopped maintaining her weapons. Some habits meant survival. As the gang disappeared into the darkness with her prized horses, Eleanor remained motionless, her mind already calculating distances, likely routes, shelter points. The McGregor gang had a fearsome reputation. 8 brutal men who'd left a trail of burning farms and grieving families across 3 territories. They were professionals, efficient and ruthless, but they'd made one critical error in planning. They hadn't killed her. Through the window, Eleanor watched the first hints of dawn paint the Montana sky in shades of purple and gold. Her weathered hands moved with practiced efficiency, checking the action of her rifle, counting ammunition. The familiar motions brought back memories of another life, tracking desperate men through unforgiving wilderness, bringing justice to lawless territories, one bounty at a time. She'd given up that life when she married Daniel, choosing peace over the endless pursuit of outlaws. The woman known as the Shadow Rider had disappeared, replaced by a simple horse breeder building a quiet life in the mountain valley. But as she prepared for what was to come, Eleanor felt the old instincts rising, sharp as ever. The sound of approaching hooves drew her attention. Through the morning mist, she recognized Marshal James Cooper riding hard toward her farm, his expression grim. Eleanor stepped onto her porch, rifle cradled casually in her arms. "Heard the commotion," Cooper called as he dismounted. "McGregor, in gang." 8 riders, Eleanor confirmed, her voice calm. "Took my entire stable, including Mercury." Cooper's weathered face creased with concern. At 50, he'd served as Marshal of Blackwood Territory long enough to know the McGregor gang's reputation. "Eleanor, these men, they're not just horse thieves. They killed 3 families in Dakota Territory last month. No survivors." "I know their reputation, James." Eleanor's voice remained steady, but her eyes had taken on a predator's focus. "Just like they should have known mine." Cooper studied her carefully. "They'd known each other 20 years, since before she'd the Shadow Rider," he said quietly. "Been a long time since anyone's whispered that name." "That life is behind me." Eleanor checked her rifle's action with practiced ease. But they didn't steal from the Shadow Rider. They stole from Daniel Mitchell's widow. That makes it personal. "Eleanor," Cooper hesitated. MacGregor's men scattered across 3 territories. Network of hideouts, informants, they've evaded every posse sent after them. A ghost of a smile touched Eleanor's lips. Posses make noise, James. Follow obvious trails. I'm just one rider, and I haven't forgotten how to move quietly. At least. Let me send word to the other marshals, organize a proper— No. Eleanor's voice was firm. By the time your telegrams are answered, they'll have my horses across the Canadian border. This needs to be handled now, and it needs to be handled my way. Cooper recognized the steel in her tone. It was the same quiet certainty she'd carried in her bounty hunting days, when she'd bring in men that had eluded every lawman in the territory. They're watching the obvious routes, he warned. Probably have men posted at key passes. Good. Eleanor stepped back into her house, emerging moments later with a worn leather saddlebag and a second rifle, a heavy Sharps buffalo gun. Let them watch the passes. I learned to track in these mountains long before the MacGregors thought to hide in them. She secured the rifles and mounted her backup horse, a sturdy bay gelding she kept pastured behind the house. The morning sun caught the silver in her hair as she settled into the saddle with fluid grace. "Give me 3 days," she told Cooper. "If you haven't heard from me by then, send your telegrams, but you won't need to." "These men," Cooper said quietly, "they're killers, Eleanor, cold-blooded." "No, James." Her voice carried the chill of mountain snow. "They're thieves who haven't met the right hunter yet, but they're about to." As Eleanor rode toward the mountains, Cooper watched her disappear into the morning mist. He'd seen that same purposeful calm 20 years ago, when she was the most feared bounty hunter in the territories. The MacGregor gang thought they'd stolen horses from a widow's farm. Instead, they'd awakened something far deadlier, a legend they'd thought was just campfire stories. The Shadow Rider was back on the hunt, and this time, it wasn't about bounties. This was about justice, and in the Montana Territory, justice had a way of finding even the most hardened outlaws, especially when it moved as quietly as a shadow and struck with the precision of a mountain storm. The MacGregor gang was about to learn why even other bounty hunters had feared the Shadow Rider's reputation. Because Eleanor Mitchell hadn't just been good at tracking outlaws, she'd been a ghost on horseback, a whispered name that made hardened killers check their back trail and sleep with one eye open. Now, as she guided her horse into the embrace of the mountains, Eleanor felt the familiar focus settling over her. The quiet certainty that had made her legendary was still there, sharp as ever. The gang had 3 days' head start, but they were riding stolen horses through country they barely knew. She'd been born in these mountains, had learned their secrets from her father, a frontier scout who'd taught her to read sign like others read books. Every broken twig, every overturned stone, every subtle change in the mountain winds, they all told a story to those who knew how to listen. The MacGregor gang was about to discover that they hadn't just stolen horses. They'd stolen the very thing that bound Eleanor Mitchell to her quiet life, and in doing so, they'd unleashed something they couldn't possibly understand. A hunter who moved like a shadow and struck with the precision of fate itself. The hunt was on, and this time, there would be no bounties claimed. Only justice served in the cold arithmetic of frontier law. As Eleanor guided her mount higher into the mountain passes, memories of her past life surfaced with startling clarity. Each rocky switchback and hidden valley held echoes of previous hunts of desperate men who'd learned too late why she'd earned her fearsome reputation. Her father's words rang clear in her mind. "The best tracker isn't the one who follows the obvious trail, Ellie. It's the one who reads the story the land itself is telling." Old Jack Harrison's general store in Blackwood Valley had always been a hub of information, and Eleanor knew the MacGregors would have stopped there before hitting her farm. She turned her horse toward town, knowing that time spent gathering intelligence now would save days of blind tracking later. The store's bell chimed as Eleanor entered, and the usual chatter died immediately. Jack's weathered face showed genuine concern as she approached the counter. "Miss Eleanor," he began, but she raised a hand to silence him. "Tell me about the strangers who came through yesterday, Jack. The ones asking questions about local horse farms." The storekeeper's eyes darted nervously to the other customers, but Eleanor's steady gaze held him. 8 men, he said finally. Leader was tall, had a distinctive limp, asked specific questions about valuable horses in the territory. "They mentioned Mercury by name, didn't they?" Jack nodded slowly, said they'd heard about Daniel's breeding program, about the Arabian bloodlines. He hesitated. "There's something else. They weren't just asking about horses. They wanted to know about you specifically, if you lived alone, if you had protection." Eleanor's expression didn't change, but her eyes grew colder. "Someone's been feeding them information, local knowledge." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Miss Eleanor," Jack lowered his voice, "these men, there's talk they're connected to something bigger. A whole network of horse thieves supplying remounts for bank robbers across the territories. They've got friends in high places." "High places won't help them in the mountains, Jack." Eleanor selected ammunition with deliberate care. "And local. Knowledge works both ways. These peaks haven't changed in 20 years. As she turned to leave, young Tommy Jenkins, Jack's 16-year-old nephew, stopped her. "Mrs. Mitchell, is it true what they say about you being the Shadow Rider?" Eleanor studied the boy's earnest face. She saw the same hunger for adventure she'd once carried before she'd learned the true cost of the life she'd led. "That was a long time ago, Tommy. Sometimes the past is best left buried." But as she mounted up, Eleanor knew that wasn't entirely true. The past had a way of resurfacing when it was needed most. The skills that had made her legendary, the ability to read terrain like others read books, to move unseen through seemingly open country, to predict a fugitive's movements before they made them, those hadn't faded. They'd just been waiting, like a well-oiled rifle in a chest, ready when called upon. At the edge of town, she encountered Samuel Wade, the aging frontier scout who'd occasionally worked with her in her bounty hunting days. His expression was grim as he approached. "Caught their back trail heading north toward Chimney Rock," he said without preamble. "They're moving fast but careless, breaking branches, leaving clear sign, almost like they want to be followed," Eleanor finished. "They're setting up an ambush." Wade nodded. "Classic McGregor tactic. Lead pursuers into a box canyon or narrow pass, have men positioned above with rifles." He studied her face carefully. "You're going after them anyway, aren't you?" "They took Mercury, Sam. Daniel's last gift to me." Understanding crossed Wade's. Weathered features. He'd been at their wedding, had watched Eleanor transform from the feared Shadow Rider into a respected horse breeder. Had seen how complete that transformation had been. Until now, "They say McGregor's got a network of caves up in the high country," he offered. "Places only locals would know about." "Then it's fortunate I was born in these mountains." Eleanor checked her saddle straps one final time. "The gang's good at what they do, Sam. Professional, efficient, but they made one fundamental mistake." "What's that?" "They think they're hunting in my territory. Truth is, they've wandered into my killing ground." As Eleanor rode north, the morning, sun casting long shadows across the valley, she reflected on the changes the years had brought. The woman who'd earned the name Shadow Rider had been younger, driven by the thrill of the hunt and the satisfaction of bringing lawbreakers to justice. The woman she'd become, Daniel Mitchell's widow, respected horse breeder, pillar of the community, had found peace in a quieter life. But now, as she prepared to hunt the most dangerous gang in the territories, Eleanor realized that perhaps both women had something to contribute. The Shadow Rider's skills and instincts, tempered by the wisdom and patience she'd gained in her years with Daniel, might prove to be a combination even the McGregors couldn't match. The mountain winds carried the promise of approaching storms. As Eleanor began the long climb toward Chimney Rock, let the gang watch the obvious passes, let them set their ambushes and lay their traps. They were about to learn that in the Montana Territory, some legends didn't fade with time. They just waited in the shadows, ready to strike when justice demanded it. The first drops of rain began to fall as Eleanor made camp in a sheltered cave, overlooking the northern valley. From this vantage point, she could monitor 3 separate passes while remaining hidden from any watchful eyes below. As she tended to her mount, her mind drifted to the first time she'd used this spot, 23 years ago, during her initial manhunt. She'd been barely 20 then, tracking the infamous Peterson brothers after they'd murdered her father. That hunt had forged her into the Shadow Rider, teaching her lessons written in blood and gunsmoke. The cave still held remnants of those days, a cache of supplies hidden behind loose rocks, emergency provisions she'd maintained even years after. Hanging up her guns, the steady drumbeat of rain against stone brought another memory, sharper and more painful. 5 years into her bounty hunting career, she'd tracked a gang of stagecoach robbers to this same region. Their leader, Marcus Reed, had been different. From her usual quarry, educated, sophisticated, and utterly ruthless, he'd recognized her skill, offered her a place in his operation. "We're the same, you and I," he'd said, "both living outside society's rules, both masters of the hunt." Her response had been a pair of manacles and a 3-day ride to the territorial prison. Reed's words had haunted her, though, planting seeds of doubt that eventually led her to question her chosen path. A flash of lightning illuminated the valley, and Eleanor caught movement on the western ridge. 2 riders moving carefully through the storm, McGregor's scouts checking the back trails. Their caution confirmed her suspicions. They knew exactly who they'd stolen from. Eleanor retrieved a battered journal from her saddlebags, its pages filled with carefully drawn maps and notes accumulated over decades of tracking. Each territory, each mountain range held its secrets, and she documented them all. But it was the final entry, written in Daniel's strong hand 2 days before the fever took him, that drew her attention. "My dearest Eleanor," he'd written, "I've always known who you were, even when you tried to bury that part of yourself. The Shadow Rider wasn't just a bounty hunter, she was justice in a land that desperately needed it. If you're reading this, something's happened to make you take up that mantle again. Don't fear it. You've always been both women, the hunter and the healer, the shadow and the light." Thunder rolled across the peaks as Eleanor studied her maps. The McGregor gang was professional, but they were working from outdated information. They knew the Shadow Rider's reputation from a decade ago, but they didn't understand what those years of peaceful ranching had added to her skills. Living honestly, breeding horses, reading weather and terrain for agricultural rather than tactical purposes, it had deepened her connection to the land in ways her younger self couldn't have imagined. She didn't just track now, she could read the mountain's moods, predict storm patterns, understand how wildlife would move in response to weather. The sound of hooves on stone caught her attention. Through the rain, she spotted Maggie Turner, daughter of the local blacksmith, riding hard despite the storm. Eleanor moved to intercept her, concerned by the urgency of her approach. "Mrs. Mitchell," Maggie reined in, her face flushed with exertion. "Marshall Cooper sent me. We just got word. The McGregors, they're not just horse thieves, they're part of something bigger." Eleanor helped the girl dismount, leading both horses into the shelter of a rocky overhang. "Tell me." 3 banks were hit in Dakota Territory last month. Witnesses said the robbers had fresh horses waiting at key points, the fastest mounts anyone had seen. They've been stealing the best horses from every territory, building a network of remounts for their operations. That explains their interest in Mercury, Eleanor mused. His bloodline would give them an edge in speed and endurance. "There's more," Maggie continued. "They've got a man inside the marshal's office in Helena. That's how they've stayed ahead of the law. And," she hesitated, Go on. They knew about you, Mrs. Mitchell, about your past. Someone's been feeding them information. Someone local who remembered the Shadow Rider. Eleanor's expression hardened. A traitor in our own community. Marshal Cooper's trying to flush them out, but he's worried they might warn the gang you're coming. Let them. Eleanor's voice carried the certainty of mountain stone. Knowing I'm hunting them will only make them more afraid, more likely to make mistakes. As Maggie prepared to leave, she turned back. Mrs. Mitchell, my pa told me stories about the Shadow Rider when I was little, said she was like a ghost, appearing out of nowhere to bring criminals to justice. Said some men would surrender just hearing she was on their trail. Stories grow bigger with time, Maggie, maybe. But he also said she never killed unless she had to, that she believed in justice, not vengeance. The girl's eyes were earnest in the stormlight. That's why you married Mr. Mitchell, isn't it? He saw past the legend of who you really were. Eleanor felt the weight of Daniel's journal in her pocket. Your father's a wise man, but sometimes justice requires walking in the shadows. She helped Maggie mount up. Ride safe, stay off the main trails. After the girl disappeared into the rain, Eleanor returned to her cave, mind working through the new information. The McGregors weren't just stealing horses, they were building an infrastructure for something bigger. Their inside man at the marshal's office explained how they'd evaded capture for so long. But that same infrastructure would be their undoing. A network that large required communication, supply lines, regular contact points. And she knew these territories better than any living soul, knew the hidden places where messages would be passed, where stolen horses would be held before being moved across borders. Eleanor added fresh notes to her journal, updating trails and landmarks with recent observations. The rain would wash away obvious tracks, but it would also show her which passes the gang avoided, which caves they used for shelter. Nature itself would help her track her prey. A memory surfaced, Daniel watching her work with a new colt, marveling at her patience. You've got the same focus you had as a bounty hunter, he'd said. But now you use it to build rather than hunt. Miss the excitement? She'd asked. No. His smile had been knowing. You're still hunting, love. Just hunting for better things, the right bloodlines, the perfect gait, the gentle spirit in a wild horse. He'd been right. The skills that had made her the Shadow Rider hadn't vanished. They'd evolved. Now, as she prepared to hunt the most dangerous gang in the territories, those skills would serve a new purpose. The storm intensified as night fell, but Eleanor kept watch, using lightning flashes to study the valleys below. She'd learned long ago that bad weather was a tracker's ally. It drove most men to seek shelter and made them predictable. The McGregors would hole up somewhere dry, believing themselves safe in the storm's embrace. But for the Shadow Rider, the storm was merely another tool, another way to read the land's story. Tomorrow, she would begin closing the net, using decades of accumulated knowledge to tighten the noose around her prey. They thought they were dealing with a legend from the past, a simple widow turned horse breeder. They were about to learn that some legends grew stronger with time, and that justice, like the shadow she'd once been named for, could strike from any direction, at any moment. The hunt was no longer just about stolen horses. It was about protecting her community from a cancer that had taken root in its midst. As lightning split the sky, Eleanor checked her weapons one final time, each motion automatic after countless repetitions. The McGregor gang had unwittingly started something they couldn't finish, awakening a force they didn't understand. By stealing her horses, they'd forced her to reconcile both halves of herself, the patient rancher and the relentless hunter. Tomorrow, they will begin to understand their mistake. The Shadow Rider was more than just a legend from the past. She was justice personified, and she was coming for them with the inexorable force of the mountain storms themselves. Eleanor's preparations. were interrupted by the soft whistle of a hermit thrush, a sound that shouldn't be heard during a nighttime storm. She stiffened, recognizing the signal from her bounty hunting days. Minutes later, Samuel Wade materialized from the darkness, his buckskins glistening with rain. "Figured you'd use this spot," he said quietly, shaking water from his hat. "Found something you need to see." From his vest, he withdrew a folded piece of paper, carefully protected from the rain. Eleanor recognized the letterhead of the Helena Marshal's office. "Their inside man got sloppy," Wade explained. "Left this in the telegraph office. Complete schedule of Marshal patrols for the next month, including which passes they're watching and which they're leaving open." Eleanor studied the document, her experienced eye picking out the pattern. They're creating clear corridors for moving stolen horses, coordinating with bank robberies across 3 territories. She traced a route on her map. "See how the patrols are being diverted from these. Mountain passes right before each robbery. There's more." Wade's voice dropped lower. "Name at the bottom of that document, William Hawkins. Ring any bells?" Eleanor's breath caught. "Billy Hawkins, the deputy marshal who led that failed pursuit of the Peterson brothers all those years ago. The same man who could have saved your father if he hadn't been bought off." Wade watched her carefully. "Seems he's still in the pocket of Outlaws, just wearing a bigger badge now." The revelation crystallized something in Eleanor's mind. That's how they knew about Mercury, about my past. Hawkins would have kept records from the Peterson case, known exactly who the Shadow Rider was. "Man's got a long memory and a longer reach," Wade cautioned. "He's been building this network for years, using his position to protect certain gangs while pursuing others. Makes him look effective while letting his real partners operate freely." Lightning illuminated the cave as Eleanor processed this information. The scope of what she was dealing with had just expanded dramatically. This wasn't just about stolen horses anymore. It was about corruption at the highest levels of law. "Enforcement, there's something else you should know," Wade continued, settling closer to the small fire. "Your neighbor, Thomas Reed, he's been asking questions about your daily routine, your security measures. Too many questions for comfort." "Reed?" Eleanor's mind flashed to the friendly rancher who'd helped her repair fences just last week. "He's got 3 young children, a wife." Perfect cover. Man like that, nobody questions why he's riding the boundaries at odd hours, watching his neighbor's movements. Wade's expression was grim. "Found fresh tracks leading from his north pasture to where the McGregors made camp before hitting your farm. He's their local eyes." The betrayal stung, deeper than Eleanor had expected. She'd shared meals with the Reeds, helped their youngest daughter learn to ride. "His wife, Sarah, does she know?" "Don't think so. Woman's genuine in her friendship with you. But Thomas, he's been meeting with strangers in town, coming back with more money than cattle sales explain." Eleanor added this piece to the puzzle she was assembling. The McGregors aren't just a gang. They're part of a larger organization. Professional thieves, corrupt lawmen, local informants, all working together to move stolen horses and support bank robberies across the territories. "Making it nearly impossible for honest marshals to catch them," Wade agreed. "By the time word of a robbery reaches the next territory, they've got fresh mounts waiting, clear routes to follow, and law enforcement looking the other way." "Almost impossible," Eleanor corrected, studying her maps with renewed purpose. "But they've made one critical mistake." "What's that?" "They're trying to run their operation through my hunting grounds. These mountains, I know every cave, every hidden valley, every game trail that can support a horse. More importantly, I know which local families I can trust, and now I know which I can't." Wade nodded slowly. "You're not just going after the McGregors anymore, are you?" "No." Eleanor's voice carried the finality of a judge's gavel. "I'm going to dismantle their entire operation. The gang, their corrupt marshal, their local informants, all of them." That's a tall order, even for the Shadow Rider. Eleanor's smile was cold as mountain frost. The Shadow Rider worked alone, Sam, but I'm not just her anymore. I've spent years building relationships in this community, earning trust, learning who stands for what. Daniel taught me the value of those connections. As if to emphasize her point, the cave mouth darkened with another figure. Young Billy Jenkins, the blacksmith's apprentice, carrying a wrapped package. "Miss Eleanor," he whispered, "Pa sent these, said you might need them." Inside the package were 4 freshly made horseshoes, crafted with a distinctive pattern Eleanor recognized. They would leave tracks that looked normal to most observers, but would be instantly recognizable to anyone who knew what to look for. "Your father's a good man, Billy," she said softly. "These will help me track Mercury even after they change his shoes." The boy hesitated. "There's something else." Overheard. "Some men talking in the saloon. They're planning something big during the governor's visit next month. Something about using the celebration as cover for their biggest operation yet." Wade straightened. "Governor's coming to dedicate the new railroad spur. Half the territory's officials will be there, along with their security details, their horses." Eleanor's mind raced ahead. The perfect opportunity to steal prime mounts and gather intelligence about law enforcement movements throughout the region. Plus whatever else they're planning, Wade added grimly. "Rob the bank during the celebration, maybe even take hostages for ransom. Territory's richest men will all be in one place." Eleanor rolled up her maps with decisive movements. "Then we have less time than I thought. Billy, I need you to get word to Marshal Cooper. Tell him to keep the governor's visit quiet for now. Let Hawkins think his secrets are still safe." The boy nodded and disappeared into the storm. Eleanor turned to Wade. "I'll start with the McGregors. Once I find them, I'll use them to unravel the rest of the organization. But I'll need your help, Sam. Need you to watch Thomas Reed, track his movements, find out who he meets with." "Consider it done." Wade moved toward the cave entrance, then paused. "Eleanor, what you're taking on here, it's bigger than anything the Shadow Rider ever handled. These men, they've got money, power, political connections." "True." Eleanor checked her weapons one final time. "But I've got something they don't." "What's that?" 20 years of built-up knowledge about this territory, a lifetime of tracking experience, and most importantly," she met his gaze steadily, "I've got nothing left to lose. They've already taken everything that mattered, my horses, my trust in my neighbors, the peace I built with Daniel. Now it's my turn to take something from them." "Their operation?" "No, Sam." Eleanor's voice carried the certainty of mountain stone. "Their future." As Wade disappeared into the storm, Eleanor made her final preparations. By stealing her horses, the McGregors had inadvertently exposed a cancer growing in the heart of the territory. Now she would exercise it, using skills honed over 2 decades of hunting men and raising horses. They thought they were dealing with a legend from the past, a simple widow seeking revenge. Instead, they'd awakened something far more dangerous. A hunter who combined the Shadow Rider's lethal skills with years of accumulated knowledge about the territory and its people. The storm raged through the night, but Eleanor kept her vigil, watching the valleys below, planning her next moves. Tomorrow she would begin dismantling the McGregors' operation piece by piece, using their own network against them, and when she was done, the territory would be cleaner for it. Justice would be served not just for her stolen horses, but for every honest citizen who'd suffered under this web of corruption and greed. First light painted the mountain peaks in shades of amber as Eleanor descended into Shadow Creek Valley, following signs only a lifetime of tracking could reveal. Fresh scrapes on river rocks where horses had crossed, branches bent back to clear a path for loaded pack animals, subtle indentations in moss where men had rested. The McGregor gang was good, professional enough to avoid obvious tracks, smart, enough to use water crossings to break their trail. But they didn't understand how the valley's morning mists betrayed their passage, how disturbed wildlife patterns told stories of recent intrusions. A flash of blue caught her eye. A kingfisher, darting upstream rather than following its usual fishing route. Eleanor reined in, studying the bird's behavior. She'd learned long ago that wildlife held secrets for those who knew how to read them. Animals changed their patterns when strangers invaded their territory. Following the kingfisher's path led her to fresh evidence, cigarette ash near a concealed campsite, still fragrant enough to be from that morning. The gang was moving north, but something about their pattern bothered her. They were taking unnecessary risks, camping in spots that left them vulnerable. "Almost like they want to be found," she murmured, examining marks left by Mercury's distinctive gait. Her prized stallion was fighting the unfamiliar handlers, creating signs she could read like a newspaper. A twig snapped in the underbrush. Eleanor's rifle appeared in her hands as she melted into the shadows, years of instinct taking over. Through the trees, she spotted two figures approaching, but not the outlaws she'd expected. "Miss Eleanor?" A woman's voice, familiar but trembling, with fear. "Please, we need your help." Sarah Reed emerged from the forest, supporting her husband Thomas, who clutched his bloodied side. Eleanor kept her rifle trained steady, remembering Wade's warning about Thomas being an informant for the gang. "That's close enough," Eleanor commanded. "Explain." Sarah's face was streaked with tears. "They turned on him, said he knew too much, was becoming a liability. Thomas tried to stop them from—" She choked back a sob. "Stop them from what?" "From taking our children." Thomas coughed, blood staining his shirt. "They grabbed Billy and Emma this morning. Said they needed insurance, leverage to make sure no one followed them into Black Hawk Canyon." Eleanor's mind raced. Black Hawk Canyon was a notorious death trap, a maze of narrow passages and high cliffs, perfect for ambush. It was also nowhere near the gang's apparent northern heading. "Why tell me this?" She studied Thomas's face. "Wade saw your tracks leading to their camp before they hit my farm. You've been working with them." "I was." Thomas's voice carried the weight of crushing guilt. "They approached me 6 months ago. Said they needed local information about horse farms. Offered enough money to pay off our mortgage. I didn't know they were planning to take children." Sarah gripped her husband's arm. "Please, Miss Eleanor, I know we don't deserve your help, but Billy's only 8, and Emma's not yet 6. Eleanor processed this new information with cold precision. The McGregors were escalating, taking hostages to protect their escape. But something felt wrong about the setup. "The gang's heading north," she observed. "Black Hawk Canyon's east. Why tell me about the canyon unless—" "Unless they want you to go there," Thomas finished. "It's a trap. They knew you'd come after them, planned for it from the start. But I couldn't—" he grimaced in pain. "Couldn't let them use children as bait, not even to save myself." Eleanor studied the couple before her. Sarah's terror for her children was genuine, and Thomas's wound was real enough. But that didn't mean they were telling the whole truth. "Where are they really taking the children?" Thomas blinked in surprise. Sarah answered, "Black Hawk Canyon, like we said." "No." Eleanor's voice could have frosted summer leaves. "The real location. Because right now, Thomas, you're bleeding out. And if I waste time checking an empty canyon, your children will pay the price for your lies." The couple exchanged glances. Finally, Thomas slumped in defeat. "Cottonwood Basin. They've got a hideout in the old silver mine there, but they'll kill us for telling you." "They were already going to kill you," Eleanor replied evenly. "That's why you're here. Last chance at redemption." Moving with fluid efficiency, she retrieved medical supplies from her saddlebags. "Sarah, bind his wound. Real location buys real help. Then you'll tell me everything. About Deputy Marshal Hawkins, about the governor's visit, about their entire operation." As she worked, Sarah spoke quickly. The McGregors are just one part. There's a network of gangs all coordinating through Hawkins. They're not just stealing horses. They're gathering intelligence about every major ranch and business. In the territory, the governor's visit is their chance to expand, Thomas added weakly. Plans for new railroad spurs, banking contracts, land grants. Every territory official will have sensitive documents with them. And children make excellent insurance, Eleanor concluded grimly, especially from a family known to be working with the gang. No one would suspect they're really hostages. Sarah finished bandaging her husband. There's more. The gang that hit your farm. They're not all McGregors. Some are hired guns brought in special for this job. They wanted your horses, yes, but they mainly wanted to flush out the Shadow Rider. Why? Because you're a wild card, Thomas explained. Someone who knows the territory too well, who might spot their larger operation. They needed to deal with you before the governor's visit. Either kill you in their trap or force you to flee the territory. Eleanor absorbed this information, adding it to her mental map of the situation. The McGregors had wanted her to follow. In the north, then circle east to Black Hawk Canyon, wasting precious time while they moved the children west to Cottonwood Basin. How many men are at the mine? 4 with the children, Sarah answered. Plus whoever's watching the North Trail to maintain the deception. But the basin has a back entrance. Old mining road overgrown now. They won't expect anyone to know about it. Because that information isn't in any of Hawkins's reports, Eleanor nodded. But my father used that road 20 years ago when he was scouting for the original silver operation. She checked her weapons methodically. Sarah, there's a cave, 2 miles south. Take Thomas there. Treat his wound properly. I left supplies behind a false wall. You'll find everything you need. The children will be safe, Eleanor promised. The gang thinks they're clever, using hostages to protect their operation. But they've forgotten something important about the Shadow Rider. What's that? I never needed a gun to be dangerous. My real weapon was always knowing things other people didn't, she mounted smoothly, like the fact that Cottonwood Basin floods during spring thaws. The mine entrance they're using, it's not the only way in. As Eleanor rode west, her mind categorized and analyzed every piece of information. The McGregors weren't just ruthless, they were methodical, thinking several moves ahead. They'd manipulated local informants, set up false trails, and taken hostages to cover their true objectives. But their elaborate plan had a fatal flaw. They were playing a territory-wide game, thinking in terms of maps and reports and official documents. Eleanor thought in terms of the land itself, every stream, every cave, every quirk of weather and wildlife. They'd chosen Cottonwood Basin because it looked secure on paper. One main entrance, high ground for centuries, good sightlines. But Eleanor had spent decades learning the territory's secrets. She knew about the underground river that had carved hidden passages through the limestone, about the narrow chimneys that led to the surface, about the cave system that ran parallel to the old mine workings. More importantly, she knew that in trying to trap the Shadow Rider, they'd made her more dangerous. The younger version of herself might have charged in, relying on speed and skill with a gun. But the woman she'd become, the one who'd spent years breeding horses, reading bloodlines, understanding how patterns repeated through generations, she was capable of far more subtle approaches. The McGregors thought they were facing a legend from the past. Instead, they were about to confront something far deadlier, a hunter who combined the Shadow Rider's skills with a rancher's patience and a mother's protective instincts. The sun climbed higher as Eleanor followed the overgrown mining road, her mind already formulating a plan. The gang had taken children to ensure their safety. Instead, they'd given her the perfect reason to dismantle their entire operation, piece by bloody piece. They were about to learn why the Shadow Rider's most dangerous weapon had never been her gun. It had been her ability to turn her prey's own plans against them. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through Cottonwood Basin, as Eleanor surveyed the mine entrance from a hidden vantage point. Her trained eye picked out details others might miss: fresh scuff marks on the weathered support beams, a discarded coffee tin that hadn't had time to rust, the way local birds avoided certain areas of the clearing. Movement near the mine caught her attention. A young guard, barely out of his teens, emerged to scan the surroundings. His expensive boots and clean-cut appearance marked him as different from the usual rough outlaws. Eleanor's suspicions deepened. This was no ordinary gang member. A soft whistle drew the guard's attention back to the mine entrance. Through her field glasses, Eleanor caught a glimpse of the man who emerged, and her blood ran cold. Victor Hawkins, Deputy Marshal William Hawkins' son, supposedly away at law school back east. So that's how they're passing information, she murmured. Family connections hidden in plain sight. The pieces clicked into place. William Hawkins wasn't just corrupted by greed. He was building a dynasty. His son's presence here, coordinating with the McGregors, suggested this operation went beyond simple horse theft and bank robbery. They were establishing a permanent criminal enterprise, using the legitimacy of the marshal's office as cover. Eleanor carefully made her way around the basin's rim, using natural cover to approach the hidden back entrance she remembered. The old mining road had deteriorated more than she'd expected, but decades of tracking had taught her to move silently even over loose scree. Near the secondary entrance, she discovered fresh evidence of the operation's scope. Supply crates, marked with cavalry quartermaster stamps. The gang wasn't just stealing horses, they were intercepting military shipments, probably using Hawkins's position to access delivery schedules. A child's muffled cry echoed from somewhere within the mine. Eleanor froze, listening intently. The sound came again, followed by a harsh voice. "Quiet down in there! Your pa's mistakes ain't our concern." She documented the voice's location in her mental map of the mine layout. The children were being held in one of the old storage chambers, likely near the underground stream, she remembered. That same stream had carved natural chimneys through the limestone, potential escape routes, if one knew where to find them. Flash of movement caught her eye. Another guard, this one checking the back entrance. His bearing and the way he handled his weapon spoke of military training. Eleanor melted deeper into the shadows, recognizing him from wanted posters. Marcus Reed's son, James. The stagecoach robber's offspring had followed in his father's criminal footsteps, but with military precision learned during the war. The connections multiplied in Eleanor's mind. Reed's gang had specialized in intercepting military payrolls, using inside information that must have come from Hawkins's office. Now his son was working with the McGregors, bringing tactical expertise to their operations. This wasn't just a criminal enterprise. It was a generational alliance, sons of outlaws and corrupt lawmen working together, combining their inherited knowledge and connections to build something bigger than their fathers had managed. Eleanor retrieved her father's old journal from her saddlebag, consulting the hand-drawn map of the mine's interior. The main shaft branched into 3 levels, with the storage chambers located on the middle level. Natural chimneys vented the lower level, preventing dangerous gas buildup. Those same chimneys could provide access, if one was skilled enough to navigate them. More importantly, they'd allow her to gauge the defenders' positions by tracking the movement of smoke from their lamps and cooking fires. A horse's angry whinny echoed from within the mine. Mercury, still fighting his captors. Eleanor allowed herself a grim smile. Her prized stallion's temperament, which some had criticized as too spirited, was now working in her favor. He'd wear down his handlers, force them to expend energy and attention controlling him. As she formulated her plan, hoofbeats approached along the main trail. Eleanor pressed into a natural alcove, watching as 2 riders emerged from the forest. She recognized both. McGregor himself, his distinctive limp more pronounced than usual, and beside him, a figure that made her grip her rifle tighter. Judge Harrison Blackwood, one of the territory's most respected judicial officials. There. Conversation carried clearly in the afternoon air. Everything's prepared for the governor's visit, Blackwood was saying. Security details, parade routes, all arranged to leave certain areas accessible. And the documents? McGregor demanded. Land grant certificates, railroad contracts, territorial banking licenses, all will be in the governor's private car, along with enough cash to make this worth our while. Eleanor's mind raced. Judge Blackwood's involvement explained how the gang had escaped prosecution so many times. He'd been deliberately undermining cases against them, while using his position to access sensitive information about valuable targets. The scope of the conspiracy stunned her. This wasn't just about stolen horses or bank robberies. It was about controlling the territory's future. With access to land grants and banking licenses, they could legitimize their criminal enterprise, build a power base that would be nearly impossible to dismantle. The children weren't just hostages to prevent pursuit. They were insurance against their parents exposing the larger operation. The gang was tying up loose ends, preparing for something bigger than simple theft. Eleanor checked her ammunition and supplies one final time. The gang had assembled an impressive operation combining criminal experience, military precision, and political protection. They thought they'd planned for every contingency, but they'd made one crucial error. In focusing on the bigger picture, territory-wide corruption, complex criminal networks, political manipulation, they'd overlooked the immediate threat. They thought the Shadow Rider was a relic of the past, a simple tracker they could outmaneuver with their sophisticated plans. They'd forgotten that the most dangerous predators were the ones that adapted, that learned, that combined old skills with new knowledge. Eleanor hadn't spent the last decade just breeding horses. She'd been learning to read bloodlines, to understand how traits passed from generation to generation. Now, facing the sons of old enemies and allies turned traitor, she would use that knowledge. These men had inherited their father's ambitions, their criminal talents, their corrupt connections, but they'd also inherited their weaknesses, their blind spots, their fatal flaws. The sun began its descent toward the western peaks as Eleanor made her final preparations. By midnight, she would begin dismantling their operation piece by piece, using their own overconfidence against them. The children would be saved, the conspiracy exposed, and justice would be served not just for stolen horses, but for an entire territory held hostage by corruption. The Shadow Rider was about to demonstrate why legends sometimes grew stronger with time, and why the most dangerous hunter was one who understood both the past and the present. Dusk settled over Cottonwood Basin, bringing with it the first hint of mountain chill. Eleanor used the deepening shadows to work her way closer to the mine's ventilation chimneys, careful to disturb nothing that might betray her presence. The voices of the children floated up through the natural airways, mixed with the sounds of their captors. "When can we go home?" Young Emma Reed's voice trembled. "Quiet." The guard's response was harsh. "Your pa should have thought about that before he got soft." Another voice, Victor Hawkins, his educated tones distinct from the others. "Check their ropes. Can't have them slipping away before the governor's visit." Eleanor positioned herself near the largest chimney, using the rock walls to amplify and channel sound. Each voice helped her build a mental map of positions and movements below. 4 men in the main chamber with the children. 2 more at the mine entrance. McGregor and Judge Blackwood had moved deeper into the complex, likely discussing details of their planned operation. A flicker of movement caught her attention. A figure approaching through the gathering darkness. Eleanor's hand moved to her rifle, then relaxed slightly as she recognized Maria Thompson, the territory's most respected midwife. The elderly woman's presence here was unexpected, but not entirely surprising. In her work, Maria traveled freely between communities, hearing things others missed. "Miss Eleanor," Maria whispered, settling beside her. brought what you asked for. Eleanor hadn't asked for anything, but years of tracking had taught her to read situations quickly. Maria was offering information, using the pretense of a request as cover in case she was followed. "Tell me." Judge Blackwood's clerk was in town today buying supplies. Overheard him talking about special documents being prepared. Property, deeds, mining claims, banking certificates, all blank, but with the territorial seal already applied. Eleanor's mind raced ahead. They're planning to forge documents during the governor's visit. Use the confusion to slip them in with legitimate papers. There's more. Maria glanced nervously at the darkening sky. Military patrol came through this morning. Lieutenant looked worried. Said they've lost contact with 3 supply convoys in the past month. The cavalry shipments we found evidence of, Eleanor murmured. They're not just intercepting them, they're making them disappear entirely, probably using Hawkins's authority to falsify reports, claim the supplies were delivered. A child's cry echoed from below, quickly muffled. Maria's weathered face creased with concern. Poor lambs. Reed's children. They don't deserve this. No one does. Eleanor's voice was soft but carried steel beneath it. But the gang's made a mistake using them as hostages. How so? They think having children as captives makes them safer, ensures no one will risk a frontal assault. Eleanor checked her weapons with practiced care. Instead, they've given me a reason to be absolutely thorough in dismantling their operation. No loose ends, no one left to seek revenge. Maria nodded slowly. You'll need help. My people, we, can create distractions in town during the governor's visit. Draw attention away from certain areas. Good. But first, I need you to get word to Marshal Cooper. Tell him about the military shipments, but quietly. Let him start investigating from that angle while keeping Hawkins in the dark. The midwife hesitated. There's something else you should know. Rumors in town. Some say Thomas Reed didn't turn on the gang willingly. Say they've got leverage on him beyond his children. Eleanor's attention sharpened. What kind of leverage? His wife, Sarah. She's Judge Blackwood's illegitimate daughter. Few know it, but the gang found out. Used it to force both families' cooperation. The pieces shifted in Eleanor's mind, forming a new pattern. The gang wasn't just building a criminal empire, they were weaving a web of blackmail and coercion, using family secrets and hidden connections to ensure loyalty. A horse's nervous whicker drifted up from below. Mercury. Still resisting his captors, Eleanor allowed herself a grim smile. Her stallion's defiance was more than just temperament now. It was actively disrupting the gang's careful plans. They've posted extra guards because of him, Maria observed. 3 men just to handle one. Horse, good. Every man watching Mercury is one less watching for me. Eleanor retrieved her father's journal, comparing his old mind maps to what she could observe. The lower level has a chamber that floods during spring thaws. Water has to drain somewhere. The underground river, Maria finished. It emerges in Shadow Creek, half a mile east. My grandmother used to tell stories about caves all through these hills, connected by water passages. Eleanor's mind worked through implications. The gang was professional, thorough in their planning. They'd have guards posted at obvious entrances, watching likely approach routes. But they were thinking like outlaws, like military men, like corrupt officials. They weren't thinking like someone who'd spent decades learning the land's secrets. Maria, I need you to gather certain supplies. Eleanor detailed her requirements. Rope, mining lamps, specific herbs the local tribes used. And find Samuel Wade. Tell him to watch for my signal tomorrow night. What signal? He'll know. We used it during our hunting days. Eleanor's voice carried absolute certainty. When he sees it, he'll need to move fast. The children will need somewhere safe, somewhere the gang won't think to look. My people can hide them, Maria offered. "We know places in the hills where even the army never found us." New sounds drifted up through the ventilation chimney, McGregor's distinctive limping gait, accompanied by Judge Blackwood's cultured tones. They were discussing security arrangements for the governor's visit, revealing details that confirmed the operation's scope. 3 territorial judges attending, Blackwood was saying, each with their own security detail, their own sensitive documents. Once we control those papers, we can legitimize any land claim, any business deal. And the military angle? McGregor demanded. Already handled. Hawkins has arranged for his most trusted deputies to provide security for the ammunition shipments. By the time anyone realizes those shipments never reach their intended destinations, we'll have enough weapons stockpiled to arm a small army. Eleanor absorbed this information, adding it to her growing understanding of their plan. The gang wasn't just planning a simple heist during the governor's visit. They were positioning themselves to take control of the entire territory's legal and military infrastructure. Maria touched her arm gently. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking they've built something impressive," Eleanor replied softly. "Multiple layers of security, political protection, legitimate business fronts. They're prepared for posses, for military intervention, for federal investigators. But not for you. No." Eleanor's smile was cold in the gathering darkness. "They're prepared for the shadow rider they remember. A simple tracker, a bounty hunter working alone. They don't understand what 20 years of peace taught me. What's that? Patience, the value of community, the importance of knowing not just the land, but its people." Eleanor checked her weapons one final time. "They think they're building an empire, but empires fall when their foundations are undermined. And I've spent 20 years learning every tunnel, every cave, every secret passage in these mountains." As Maria slipped away to gather the requested supplies, Eleanor continued her surveillance. The gang had assembled a formidable operation, combining criminal expertise with political power and military precision. But they'd made one fundamental miscalculation. They thought they were facing the shadow rider of legend, a lone hunter tracking her prey. Instead, they were about to confront someone far more dangerous, a woman who had spent decades building connections, learning secrets, and understanding the true power of patience. The mountain winds carried the children's muffled sobs as darkness claimed the valley. Soon, Eleanor thought, soon those children would be safe, the gang's operation would be exposed, and justice would be served with the same quiet efficiency she'd once used to track outlaws across 5 territories. The Shadow Rider was about to demonstrate why some legends grew stronger with time, and why the most dangerous predator was one who knew how to wait for the perfect moment to strike. A new sound drew Eleanor's attention, the distinctive rhythm of cavalry hoofbeats approaching the mine. Through her field glasses, she observed Lieutenant Michael Bradford, the young officer who'd been investigating the missing supply convoys. But something was off about his approach. Too confident, too direct for a man supposedly searching for stolen military supplies. "Another piece of the puzzle," Eleanor whispered to Maria, who hadn't yet departed. "Watch how the guards react." Instead of challenging the officer, the sentries merely nodded as Bradford dismounted and entered the mine. Through the ventilation, a shaft. His conversation with Victor Hawkins drifted up clearly. "Fort Richardson's commander is getting suspicious," Bradford reported. "Started comparing requisition documents, noting discrepancies in delivery signatures. Can you handle it?" Hawkins's tone carried both threat and promise. "Already have. Arranged a convenient fire in the quartermaster's office. Most records were destroyed." Bradford's voice hardened. "But my price just went up. Risk is higher now." Eleanor's mind catalogued this new information. The conspiracy reached into the military itself, with corrupt officers facilitating the theft of arms and supplies. But Bradford's demands suggested strain in the alliance, greed threatening to unravel their careful planning. Maria touched Eleanor's arm. My youngest son works at Fort Richardson's stables, says there's been talk among the soldiers, ammunition going missing, weapons that never reach frontier outposts. They're not just stealing supplies, Eleanor realized. They're deliberately weakening border defenses. But why? The answer came from below, as Judge Blackwood's voice carried through the shaft. Once the governor signs these territorial expansion documents, we'll control access to the northern passes. Any settlers, any military expeditions, any trade convoys, they'll all have to go through us. Or around us, McGregor added. Through hostile Indian territory without proper arms or supplies. Either way, we profit. The scope of their ambition was staggering. They weren't just building a criminal empire, they were reshaping the entire territory's future, creating bottlenecks they could control, weakening military presence in strategic areas. There's more, Maria whispered. My people have seen strange riders in the high country. Men speaking Spanish, carrying Mexican military. Weapons. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. They're selling the stolen arms south of the border. Probably trading them for horses, explaining how they can replace the mounts they steal so quickly. A child's cough echoed from below, followed by Billy Reed's quiet voice trying to comfort his sister. The gang had chosen their hostages well. Children of a man who knew too much, whose wife's connection to Judge Blackwood complicated any potential rescue. New movements caught Eleanor's attention. James Reed, the former cavalry officer, was organizing men at the mine entrance, establishing a professional watch rotation. His military training showed in every detail, overlapping fields of fire, elevated observation posts, regular patrol. Patterns. They're preparing for trouble, Maria observed. Yes, but not the right kind. Eleanor studied their deployments. See how they're focused outward, watching for approaching threats? They're not paying attention to what's already inside, their perimeter. Through her field glasses, she spotted more evidence of the operation's scale. Supply crates being moved deeper into the mine bore shipping marks from 4 different territories. Gang members wore a mix of clothing, some Mexican vaquero gear, some military surplus, some Eastern City fashion. They've built a network, Eleanor explained softly. Different gangs, each with their own specialty, all coordinating through Hawkins and Blackwood. Horse thieves, arms smugglers, document forgers, corrupt officials, all working together. Maria's expression showed growing concern. How can one person fight something this big by understanding what they've forgotten? Eleanor checked her ammunition again. They think their strength is in their complexity. All these different pieces working together, but complexity means vulnerability. Pull one thread and it all unravels, Maria finished. Exactly. They're so focused on their grand plans, territorial control, arms trading, political manipulation, they've overlooked basic weaknesses. Eleanor gestured to the ventilation shafts. Like these chimneys, professional miners would have posted guards here, knowing their potential entry points. But they're not miners, Maria understood. They're outlaws playing at being businessmen, and soldiers playing at being generals, and corrupt judges playing at being kings. Eleanor's voice carried quiet certainty. Each group brings its own expertise, yes, but also its own blind spots. Military men think in terms of tactical positions. Outlaws focus on escape routes. Politicians worry about appearances and paperwork. While you see it all, Maria nodded, the whole pattern. Because I've had to be all those things, Eleanor explained. Tracker, hunter, rancher, widow. Each role taught me different ways of seeing, of thinking. Now I can use those perspectives to spot their weaknesses. A new sound drifted up, Mercury again. But this time his whinny carried a different note. Eleanor smiled grimly. He's getting more aggressive. Good. The horse? Maria questioned. How does that help? Because they don't understand him. They see a valuable stallion, a prize to be controlled. They don't realize he's been trained to respond to specific situations. Eleanor's voice carried satisfaction. Right now, he's telling me there are 8 men in his immediate vicinity. Tomorrow he'll tell me exactly when to move. Maria absorbed this, understanding dawning. You're not just planning a rescue. You're going to use their own security against them. Every guard watching Mercury is one not watching elsewhere. Every man deployed to handle a rebellious horse is one not patrolling the perimeter. Eleanor began gathering her gear. Go now. Get those supplies to Samuel Wade. Tell him to watch for the signal at sunset tomorrow. As Maria slipped away into the darkness, Eleanor continued her surveillance, noting guard changes, patrol patterns, and the subtle hierarchies between different factions of the gang. They'd built something impressive, yes, but also something precarious. Too many competing interests, too many potential betrayals waiting to happen. Lieutenant Bradford's increased demands were just the beginning. Soon, other weak points would emerge. Greed, fear, ambition. Human nature itself would help her tear down what they'd built. The moon rose over Cottonwood Basin, casting sharp shadows across the rocky terrain. In the mine below, the children had finally fallen silent, but Eleanor could still hear the guards' movements, the quiet conversations that revealed more than their speakers intended. She thought of Daniel, of the life they'd built, of the peace she'd found in leaving the Shadow Rider behind. But as she prepared for what was to come, she realized that peace hadn't made her weak. It had made her stronger, more patient, more understanding of what was truly worth fighting for. Tomorrow, she would begin dismantling their operation piece by piece, using their own complexity against them. The gang thought they were prepared for everything, POSIS, military intervention, federal investigators, but they weren't prepared for someone who could think like a tracker, move like a shadow, and strike with the precision of 20 years accumulated knowledge. They weren't prepared for a legend who had learned to wait, to watch, to understand before acting. The Shadow Rider was about to give them a lesson in the true meaning of justice and the price of underestimating a woman who had nothing left to lose but her own humanity. Dawn painted Cottonwood Basin in shades of rose and gold as Eleanor withdrew to her fallback position, a natural cave formation overlooking both the mine entrance and the hidden back trails. She'd spent the night memorizing guard rotations, noting supply deliveries, and mapping the complex web of relationships between different factions of the gang. Through her field glasses, she observed a new arrival, a Mexican vaquero leading, a string of fresh horses, their quality evident even at this distance. But it was the peculiar way the man carried himself that caught her attention, his posture, his careful scanning of the surroundings, the precision of his movements. This was no simple horse trader. Military training, Eleanor murmured, recognizing the telltale signs. Mexican cavalry, probably intelligence service. The pieces shifted in her mind, forming a clearer picture. The gang wasn't just selling stolen weapons south of the border. They were coordinating with foreign military agents, perhaps laying groundwork for something larger than simple profit. A flicker of movement drew her attention to the mine entrance. Victor Hawkins emerged, greeting the vaquero with familiar ease. Their conversation, though too distant to hear, showed none of the wariness that should exist between an American lawman's son and a foreign agent. Eleanor's mare, Spirit, shifted restlessly beside her. The horse had picked up on something, a change in the wind, a distant sound, or perhaps just the growing tension in her rider. Years of working with horses had taught Eleanor to trust their instincts. Careful observation revealed what had disturbed Spirit. A group of riders was approaching from the north, but their approach was odd. Too scattered to be a normal patrol, too coordinated to be random travelers. Through her glasses, Eleanor counted 8 men, all wearing different styles of clothing but moving with similar precision. Hired guns, she realized. Professionals brought in for the governor's visit. This is complicated matters. Local gang members could be predicted, their habits and patterns easy to read. But professional gunmen were different, disciplined, careful, trained to spot surveillance and counter-tactical plans. A child's voice drifted up from below, Emma Reed, singing softly to herself. The sound carried clearly through the morning air, a reminder of innocence caught in this web of corruption and ambition. Eleanor checked her weapons again, each motion automatic after countless repetitions. But her mind was racing ahead, analyzing. This new development, the presence of hired guns, suggested the gang was preparing for trouble. But from what direction? They already had military deserters, corrupt lawmen, and experienced outlaws. Why bring in additional muscle? The answer presented itself as she observed their deployments. The new men were being positioned to watch specific approaches, not the obvious trails a posse might use, but the hidden paths only locals would know. They're expecting resistance from the territory itself, Eleanor murmured. Not from law enforcement or the military, from the people they're trying to control. Movement near the mine entrance caught her attention. Judge Blackwood had emerged, speaking intently with McGregor and the Mexican agent. Their body language suggested disagreement. The judge gesturing emphatically, McGregor's stance aggressive, the agent maintaining careful neutrality. Eleanor shifted position, using natural features to amplify their voices without exposing herself. The timing has to be perfect, Blackwood was saying. The governor's visit is our only chance to access all the territorial documents at once. My people grow impatient, the agent replied smoothly. The weapons we were promised will be delivered as agreed, McGregor cut in. But the document operation takes priority. Without those papers, controlling the territory means nothing. Their discussion confirmed Eleanor's growing suspicions. The gang's plans went beyond simple theft and corruption. They were aiming to fundamentally alter the territory's power structure. Control of land grants, banking licenses, and military supplies would give them unprecedented influence over the region's future. A familiar whistle caught her attention, the signal she'd arranged with Samuel Wade. Eleanor spotted him approaching. From the east, leading a pack mule loaded with supplies. His presence would be unremarkable to the gang. Wade often traded with mining operations in the area. She watched him interact with the guards, his manner perfectly casual as he offered goods for sale. But his seemingly random movements were actually a carefully choreographed performance, allowing him to survey the mine's defenses while maintaining his cover as a simple trader. When Wade departed an hour later, he left behind more than just supplies. Eleanor had watched him note guard positions, weapon placements, and patrol patterns. More importantly, he'd managed to pass messages to sympathetic miners who'd been pressured into working with the gang. The morning wore on, bringing new revelations. Supply wagons arrived from 3 different directions, each carrying different types of cargo, ammunition hidden under mining equipment, forged documents concealed in coffee sacks, military uniforms mixed with civilian clothing. Eleanor documented each delivery, noting how different factions within the gang handled different aspects of the operation. McGregor's men managed the horses and conventional weapons. Hawkins's corrupt deputies handled official documents and legal matters. The Mexican agents coordinated international movements of arms and information. But it was the hired guns who drew her closest attention. These men were professionals, their movements revealing training from various backgrounds, former cavalry, Pinkerton agents, Mexican rurales. Each brought their own skills and techniques to the gang's security. "Oh, crowded down there," Wade's voice came softly as he rejoined her. He'd circled back after leaving the mine, using hidden paths they'd known from their hunting days. "They're preparing for something bigger than the governor's visit," Eleanor replied. "The hired guns, the Mexican military connection, the emphasis on territorial documents. They're positioning themselves for a major power grab. Found out something else while I was down there," Wade added. "The Reed children aren't their only insurance. They've got leverage on half the prominent families in the territory. Evidence of crimes, proof of illegitimate births, records of corrupt business deals. Eleanor absorbed this information. Blackmail to ensure cooperation after they seize. Control, clever. There's more. Some of the miners talked about hidden storage rooms deeper in the complex, said they've been stockpiling weapons and supplies for months, enough to arm a small army, or suppress any resistance after they make their move, Eleanor noted. How are the children? Scared but unharmed. Being kept in the old paymaster's office, solid walls, one entrance, easy to guard. Wade's expression darkened. But Billy Reed overheard something interesting. The gang plans to move them before the governor's visit, somewhere more secure. When? Tomorrow night. Using the cover of a supply run to their secondary camp, Wade handed her a rough map. Got this from one of the sympathetic miners. Shows the old tunnel system, including some passages the gang doesn't know about. Eleanor studied the map, comparing it to her own knowledge of the area. The tunnel system was more extensive than she'd realized, with natural caverns connecting to worked mine shafts in complex ways. They'll move the children here, she indicated a point on the map. Secondary camp's too obvious. This junction connects to 3 different exit routes, giving them maximum flexibility. Place'll be heavily guarded, Wade cautioned. No. Eleanor's voice carried quiet certainty. They'll have minimal security to avoid drawing attention. The children are just one piece of their operation. Important, but not critical. They'll focus their manpower on preparing for the governor's visit. She began making notes in her journal, updating plans based on the new information. The hired guns complicate things. They'll be more observant than local gang members, harder to predict. Want me to get word to Cooper? He could... No. Eleanor's decision was firm. More people means more chances for information to leak. We handle this ourselves, using their own complexity against them. The sun climbed higher as they refined their plans. Below, the gang's operation continued its careful preparation. Supply deliveries, guard changes, coordination between different factions. They'd built something impressive, a criminal enterprise, masquerading as legitimate business and governance. But their very sophistication was a weakness. Too many moving parts, too many different groups with their own agendas. Pull the right thread and the entire tapestry would unravel. Eleanor checked her weapons one final time before sending Wade to make final preparations. Tomorrow night, when they moved the children, she would begin dismantling their operation piece by piece, not with guns or force, but with careful application of knowledge and patience. The gang had stolen her horses, threatened her community, and corrupted the very foundations of justice in the territory. Now they would learn why the Shadow Rider's legend had endured, not because of skill with weapons or ability to track, but because of understanding how to turn an enemy's strength into their ultimate weakness. As the afternoon progressed, Eleanor observed another layer of the operation unfolding. A well-dressed man arrived in an expensive carriage, Andrew Kincaid, the territory's most prominent banker. His presence here, meeting secretly with Judge Blackwood and McGregor, suggested financial manipulation beyond simple theft. Through her field glasses, Eleanor studied the documents they exchanged. Even at this distance, she recognized the letterhead of the Territorial Banking Commission. They're not just planning to control land grants, she explained to Wade. They're positioning themselves to take over the territory's entire financial system. How so? Look at the timing. Governor's visit coincides with the quarterly bank examinations. Every territorial bank has to submit detailed records of their holdings. Eleanor's mind worked through implications. With access to those records and the ability to forge official documents, they could manipulate loan records, property titles, even currency reserves, Wade finished. Bankrupt their enemies while enriching their allies. A commotion near the mine entrance drew their attention. 2 of the hired guns were arguing with McGregor's original men, hands hovering near weapons. The dispute revealed another crack in their operation. Professional gunmen used to high-paying contracts, clashing with career outlaws. Victor Hawkins stepped in to mediate, his manner smooth, but his eyes cold. Eleanor noted how he positioned himself, using the sun to advantage while keeping clear lines of fire. His education hadn't just been for show. He'd clearly received professional training in tactical situations. "Boy's more dangerous than his father," Wade observed. "Because he combines different types of knowledge," Eleanor agreed. "Academic education, criminal expertise, political connections. Makes him unpredictable." Movement along the ridgeline caught her attention. One of the Mexican agents meeting secretly with a man she recognized as a telegraph operator from Silver Creek. The implications were clear. They had someone monitoring official communications, intercepting or altering messages. "As needed, their network's bigger than we thought," Wade murmured. "But also more vulnerable," Eleanor countered. "Each new person involved is another potential weak point, another chance for human nature to undermine their plans." As if to prove her point, she spotted Lieutenant Bradford arguing quietly but intensely with Judge Blackwood. Their body language suggested a dispute over payment or terms, the kind of internal conflict that could shatter alliances. A horse's angry screams split the afternoon air. Mercury, still fighting his captors. Eleanor smiled grimly as three men struggled to control her stallion. His continued resistance was more than just spirit. It was part of his training, designed to wear down those holding him. "Speaking of weak points," Wade nodded toward the children's makeshift prison. "Guard changed twice in the last hour. They're getting sloppy with their rotation schedule." Eleanor studied the pattern. Not sloppy, deliberate. They're establishing a routine, making it predictable. Tomorrow when they move the children, they'll change that routine completely. Trying to trap anyone watching them? Yes, but they're thinking like soldiers and lawmen, expecting direct intervention. Eleanor began making notes in her journal. They haven't considered that someone might use their own security preparations against them. The arrival of another wagon drew their attention. This one was driven by a woman, Rebecca Chen, owner of the largest dry goods store in Silver Creek. Her presence here was unexpected, but revealing. Supply chain, Eleanor realized. They're not just using obvious criminal networks, they're building legitimate business covers, using respected merchants to move goods and information. Smart, Wade acknowledged. Who'd suspect a woman running normal deliveries to mining operations, especially one with connections throughout the territory? Eleanor watched Rebecca interact smoothly with different faction leaders. Her store's the perfect front. Regular shipments, constant customer traffic, legitimate reason to handle large sums of money. A child's laugh drifted up from below. Billy Reed, apparently finding something amusing despite his situation. The sound carried a painful reminder of innocence caught in this web of corruption. "Time to send the letters," Wade asked quietly. Eleanor nodded. They'd prepared messages for trusted contacts throughout the territory, carefully coded warnings about the gang's larger plans, not enough to expose their knowledge, but sufficient to start undermining key parts of the operation. Marshal Cooper first, she decided. Tell him about the military supply thefts, but make it seem like a routine investigation. Let him start pulling that thread without realizing what he's unraveling. Then Maria's people? Yes. Have them spread certain rumors in specific places. Make the hired guns start questioning their employer's reliability. Plant seeds of doubt about payment arrangements. Wade grinned. Using gossip as a weapon. Information flows in many directions, Eleanor replied. These men have built their operation on controlling official channels. They haven't considered how common gossip might expose their plans. The afternoon waned as they refined their preparations. Eleanor noted how different factions within the gang maintained subtle separations. Professional gunmen keeping distance. From common outlaws, Mexican agents watching Anglo officials with careful neutrality, corrupt lawmen maintaining a facade of authority. Each group brought its own strengths to the operation, but also its own prejudices and priorities. Those differences could be exploited, turned into wedges that would split their alliance apart. "There's something else," Wade said finally. "Something that's been bothering me. Why here? Why this specific mine?" Eleanor had been wondering the same thing. The location was tactically sound, but not exceptional. Other abandoned mines offered similar advantages. The answer came as she observed a seemingly routine supply delivery. The wagon's contents included mining equipment, but not the kind used for precious metals. Coal, she realized. The original mine failed because they were looking for silver. But these rock formations, they're sitting on a major coal deposit, and with the railroad expansion, control this land and you control the territory's industrial future. Eleanor added this piece to her mental map of their operation. The governor's visit isn't just about immediate power. They're positioning themselves to control economic development for decades to come. The scope of their ambition was staggering. Through careful manipulation of land grants, banking records, and mineral rights, they could shape the territory's entire future. The stolen horses and weapons were just the visible part of a much larger scheme, but that same ambition made them vulnerable. They were so focused on their long-term plans that they overlooked immediate weaknesses, like a legendary tracker, who understood both human and animal nature, who could read signs others missed, who knew how to turn complexity against itself. As sunset approached, Eleanor made her final preparations. Tomorrow, when they moved the children, she would begin dismantling their operation, not with guns or force, but with careful application of knowledge and patience. The gang had built something impressive, yes, but they'd forgotten a fundamental truth about power. The bigger and more complex the structure, the more vulnerable it was to the right kind of pressure applied in exactly the right place. They were about to learn why the Shadow Rider's legend had endured, not just because of skill with weapons or ability to track, but because of understanding how to turn an enemy's greatest strength into their ultimate weakness. And in trying to trap her, they'd given her everything she needed to destroy them completely. The first hints of starlight touched Cottonwood Basin as Eleanor made her final approach to the mine's ventilation shaft. She'd waited until full dark, using the gang's own security patterns against them. Their hired guns were professional enough to maintain regular patrols, which made their movements predictable to someone with patience. A sound from below caught her attention. Hushed voices in the paymaster's office, where the Reed children were held. Through the natural acoustics of the shaft, she could make out Victor Hawkins arguing with McGregor. "Moving them tonight makes more sense," Hawkins insisted. "My sources say Cooper's getting suspicious about the military shipments." "Your sources?" McGregor's tone dripped with contempt. "Your father's losing his grip on the marshal's office. That's why we're paying a fortune for these hired guns." Their disagreement confirmed Eleanor's earlier observations, stress fractures forming in their alliance, but the timing threatened to disrupt her carefully laid plans. Movement at the mine entrance drew her attention. Through her field glasses, she spotted Rebecca Chen's wagon returning, but something was different. The merchant woman's usual confident posture was replaced by rigid tension. "Found something interesting in town," Rebecca announced to Judge Blackwood. "Telegraph operators intercepted a message from Fort Richardson. They're sending investigators, not just about missing supplies, but specific shipment routes." Eleanor smiled grimly in the darkness. Her coded messages to Marshal Cooper had worked faster than expected, forcing the gang to accelerate their plans. The impact rippled through their operation immediately. Lieutenant Bradford began arguing with the Mexican agents about payment schedules. The hired guns demanded additional guarantees. McGregor's original men bristled at being ordered around by Victor Hawkins. But it was Andrew Kincaid's arrival that truly catalyzed events. The banker emerged from his carriage, clutching a telegram, his usual polish cracked by genuine fear. "We have a serious problem," he announced to the gathered leaders. "Someone's been asking questions at the Territorial Banking Commission. They're auditing loan records, specifically ones connected to our mining operations." Judge Blackwood's reaction was immediate. "Move everything forward, tonight, the children, the documents, all of it." "That's not all," Kincaid continued. "My sources in Helena say 3 federal marshals arrived yesterday. They're reviewing every land grant issued. In the past year, Helena processed this information rapidly. Her careful undermining of their operation had worked almost too well, triggering multiple crises simultaneously. Now the gang would be forced to act hastily, abandoning their meticulous planning. A horse's scream split the night. Mercury, sensing the rising tension. His resistance had grown more aggressive over the past hours, forcing his handlers to keep him separated from the other horses. Through the ventilation shaft, Eleanor heard Billy Reed trying to comfort his sister. "Don't cry, Emma. Papa said the Shadow Rider would come for us." "Shut up about that legend," one guard snapped, but his voice carried an edge of uncertainty. The gang's leadership gathered near the mine entrance, their discussion growing heated. Eleanor shifted position carefully, using natural features to catch their words. "Moving tonight risks exposure," Bradford argued. "My men aren't in position." "Your men," McGregor cut in. "This operation doesn't answer to the military, Lieutenant." "No, it answers to success," Victor Hawkins interrupted smoothly. "And right now, our success depends on staying ahead of these investigations." Eleanor noted how the younger Hawkins positioned himself close enough to McGregor to seem supportive, but with clear lines of fire to both Bradford and the hired guns. The boy had learned more than law at school. The Chinese merchants in Silver Creek are already asking questions about missing shipments, Rebecca Chen added. They're threatening to bring in their own investigators. This news sparked fresh argument. The gang's careful compartmentalization was breaking down, each faction suddenly realizing how dependent they were on the other's discretion. Judge Blackwood attempted to restore order. "The governor's visit is in 3 days. Everything we've worked for depends on controlling those territorial documents." "Documents mean nothing if we lose our supply lines," Bradford countered. "The military investigation will be handled," the Mexican agent interrupted. "My people are already dealing with certain witnesses." The implications of that statement hung in the night air. Eleanor added it to her growing understanding of their operation. They weren't just covering their tracks, they were eliminating anyone who might expose their plans. Movement caught her attention. Several of McGregor's original men quietly withdrawing from the group, checking their weapons. The hired guns noticed too, their professional instincts sensing the shift in atmosphere. More subtle changes rippled through the camp. Rebecca Chen's wagon was being loaded with documents rather than supplies. The Mexican agents were redistributing weapons among their most trusted men. "They're preparing for internal conflict," Eleanor whispered to herself, each faction getting ready to protect its own interests. The argument at the mine entrance reached new intensity. Judge Blackwood was insisting they stick to the original plan, while Victor Hawkins advocated immediate action. McGregor's men were dividing their attention between the hired guns and the Mexican agents. A new sound drew Eleanor's attention. Boots on wooden flooring, moving with purpose toward the paymaster's office. Through the shaft, she heard the "Guards being ordered to prepare the children for transport. Time to move," Victor Hawkins commanded. "We'll split them up, more secure that way." "Split them?" McGregor demanded. "That wasn't the plan." "Plans change when federal marshals start asking questions," Hawkins replied coldly. "My father's position protects us only if we stay ahead of the investigation." The gathering dissolved into multiple heated discussions. Eleanor observed how different factions began subtly maneuvering for tactical advantage. Hired guns spreading out to cover approaches, Mexican agents moving to protect their weapons cache, McGregor's men clustering near their leader. But it was Andrew Kincaid's next words that truly shattered their alliance. "Someone's been tracking our financial movements. The banking commission knows about the forged loan documents." This revelation hit like a thunderbolt. Judge Blackwood rounded on the banker. "You assured me those records were secure." "They were," Kincaid protested. "But someone knew exactly where to look, which transactions to question." Eleanor allowed herself a small smile. Her careful hints to certain bank examiners had borne fruit, exposing the financial foundations of their operation. The impact was immediate and devastating. Trust, already strained, began dissolving entirely. The hired guns started demanding immediate payment. The Mexican agents withdrew to protect their weapons shipment. McGregor's men moved to secure their stolen horses. Through it all, Victor Hawkins tried maintaining control, his educated voice carrying over the growing chaos. But even his careful manipulations couldn't prevent the inevitable fracturing of their alliance. A child's frightened cry cut through the discord, Emma Reed being roughly awakened for transport. The sound seemed to crystallize something in the night air, reminding everyone of the stakes involved. Eleanor checked her weapons. One final time, the gang's hasty reaction to multiple threats was creating opportunities she hadn't expected. Their careful security was breaking down as each faction focused on protecting its own interests. More importantly, their rush to move the children meant they'd abandon their usual methodical approach. Mistakes would be made. Gaps would appear in their defense, and in those gaps, a shadow would move, turning their own complexity against them. The night wind carried Mercury's defiant whinny as Eleanor began implementing her plan. The gang had built their operation on careful coordination between different factions. Now, as that coordination dissolved into chaos, they were about to learn why legends sometimes grew stronger with time. Because the Shadow Rider hadn't just been waiting for them to make a mistake. She'd been systematically creating the conditions that would force those mistakes, using their own ambitions and fears against them. The breakdown of their carefully structured operation wasn't just an opportunity, it was the culmination of her true plan. And in their rush to salvage what they could, they'd never see the real threat until it was far too late. The chaos unfolding below created new patterns Eleanor hadn't anticipated. Chinese merchants from Silver Creek began arriving, led by the formidable Ming Wei, owner of the territory's largest import business. Their presence added another layer of complexity to the already volatile situation. "Your American partner promised exclusive rights to the coal shipping," Ming addressed Judge Blackwood directly. "Now we hear rumors of Mexican contracts." Eleanor watched the impact ripple through the gathering. The Mexican agents stiffened, their carefully maintained facade cracking. McGregor's men shifted uneasily, aware of deals they hadn't been informed about. "The arrangements are complicated," Blackwood attempted to smooth things over. "Once we control the territorial contracts—" "Once?" Ming's eyebrow raised. "You assured us everything was already secured." This revelation sparked fresh discord. The hired guns exchanged glances, clearly reassessing their employment prospects. Lieutenant Bradford pulled several of his men aside, speaking in urgent whispers. A new wagon approached through the darkness, this one bearing the marks of the Territorial Assay Office. Its driver, Eleanor recognized, was Benjamin Foster, official assessor of mining claims. His arrival suggested yet another layer to their operation. "The coal seams are richer than we thought," Foster announced without preamble. "Japanese investors are asking questions. They've hired their own geologists." The impact of this news hit the gathered leaders like a physical blow. Their plan hadn't just attracted federal attention. It had drawn international scrutiny. The territory's strategic location and natural resources made it valuable to multiple foreign interests. Through the ventilation shaft, Eleanor heard Victor Hawkins issuing rapid orders. Move the children first, then the weapons. Documents last, they're easier to transport quickly if needed. The children are our best insurance, McGregor objected. They're a liability if we can't maintain unity, Hawkins countered. Better to separate them now, while we still control the situation. Eleanor noted how the young man's education showed in his crisis management. He was thinking several moves ahead, preparing for multiple contingencies. But his very competence was creating new friction with McGregor's more direct approach. The arrival of another figure caught her attention, Sarah Reed, moving carefully through the shadows. Eleanor's first instinct was to warn her away, but something in the woman's manner gave her pause. Sarah approached Judge Blackwood directly, her voice carrying clearly in the night air. You promised Thomas would be protected. Now I hear you've sent men to tie up loose ends at our farm. The judge's response was cut off by fresh commotion near the mine entrance. Two of the hired guns were squaring off against Mexican agents, hands hovering near weapons. The dispute appeared to center on payment arrangements, but the underlying tension went deeper. Your father's protection isn't worth what it was, McGregor told Victor Hawkins bluntly. Time to decide where your real loyalties lie, boy. Eleanor watched the younger Hawkins carefully. His response would reveal much about the operation's internal dynamics. My loyalties? Victor's laugh was cold. I'm the only one here thinking beyond immediate profit. This territory's future belongs to those who control its resources, Ming interrupted smoothly. And your American banks are not the only source of capital. The implications of that statement rippled through the gathering. Eleanor added this new piece to her understanding. The gang's plan had attracted not just law enforcement attention, but international financial interest. Movement near. The paymaster's office drew her focus. The guards were preparing the children for transport, but their usual efficiency was compromised by the chaos around them. Small mistakes were appearing in their security, gaps in coverage, missed signals, confused communications. Through her field glasses, Eleanor spotted Samuel Wade's signal from the ridgeline. Her coded messages had reached their destinations, setting other pieces in motion. Marshal Cooper would be moving additional men into position, thinking he was investigating military supply theft rather than uncovering a territory-wide conspiracy. A horse's challenging scream split the night. Mercury again, but this time with a specific pitch Eleanor recognized. He'd sensed other horses approaching, ones he knew. Her preparations were bearing fruit faster than expected. The gang's carefully structured hierarchy was dissolving into something more volatile. Professional gunmen who'd been hired to protect the operation were now eyeing the Mexican weapons. Cash. McGregor's original men were clustering defensively around their stolen horses. The Chinese merchants were having hushed conversations with Lieutenant Bradford. Each faction was reverting to its original priorities, forgetting the larger plan in favor of immediate interests. Judge Blackwood's attempts to maintain order were increasingly desperate. The governor's visit is our chance to consolidate everything, he reminded them. The territorial documents mean nothing without control of transportation, Ming countered. The railroad contracts are worthless if we lose the military supply lines, Bradford cut in. And all of it falls apart if we can't maintain security, Victor Hawkins added with growing frustration. Eleanor observed how Sarah Reed used the arguing as cover to move closer to the paymaster's office. The woman's movements suggested purpose rather than fear. Another piece of the puzzle clicked. Sarah wasn't just Judge Blackwood's illegitimate daughter. She was working her own angle in this complex game. The night wind shifted, carrying new sounds, distant hoofbeats, barely audible but approaching from multiple directions. Eleanor's careful manipulation of information had drawn more players to the board than even she had anticipated. Through the ventilation shaft, she heard Billy Reed's voice. "The horses are getting restless." The guard's response was harsh. "Shut up, kid." But the boy was right. The stolen horses were reacting to something, their behavior changing in ways only an experienced handler would notice. Eleanor smiled grimly. Her arrangements with Maria's people were right on schedule. The chaos below reached new intensity as Andrew Kincaid returned from another coded telegraph exchange. The Banking Commission isn't just auditing records, they're freezing certain accounts. Someone's been feeding them specific information about our financial networks. This news shattered what remained of their unity. Judge Blackwood rounded on Victor Hawkins, suspecting his family's political rivals. McGregor accused the Chinese merchants of betrayal. The hired guns began openly discussing withdrawal from their contracts. Eleanor watched it all through practiced eyes, noting how each new crisis forced reactions that revealed more about their operation. The gang had built something impressive, combining criminal expertise with political power and international finance. But they'd forgotten something fundamental about complex systems. The more interconnected the pieces, the more vulnerable. The whole became to cascade failure. One broken link could shatter the entire chain. Now, as their careful alliances dissolved into chaos, they were about to learn why legends sometimes survived beyond their time. Because the Shadow Rider hadn't just been waiting in the darkness. She'd been systematically dismantling their operation from within, using their own ambitions and fears as weapons against them. The true power of her legend had never been about tracking or shooting. It had been about understanding how to turn an enemy's greatest strength into their ultimate weakness. And in trying to trap her, they'd given her everything she needed to destroy them completely. The night wind carried Mercury's defiant challenge as Eleanor prepared to implement the next phase of her plan. The gang's hasty reactions to multiple threats were creating opportunities she hadn't dared hope for. Their careful security was crumbling as each faction scrambled to protect its own interests. More importantly, their rush to move the children meant they'd abandon their usual methodical approach. Mistakes would multiply, gaps would widen, and in those gaps, justice would finally find its mark. The first move came not from Eleanor, but from the night itself. A sudden wind swept through Cottonwood Basin, carrying with it the scent of approaching rain. The unexpected weather shift sent the gang's carefully positioned sentries seeking shelter, creating momentary gaps in their security. Eleanor utilized these precious seconds to relocate closer to the mine entrance, her movements silent as mountain mist. Below, the chaos was evolving into something more dangerous. Armed men taking positions, factions preparing for potential conflict. But the boy was right. The stolen horses were reacting to something, their behavior changing in ways only an experienced handler would notice. Eleanor smiled grimly. Her arrangements with Maria's people were right on schedule. The chaos below reached new intensity as Andrew Kincaid returned from another coded telegraph exchange. The Banking Commission isn't just auditing records, they're freezing certain accounts. Someone's been feeding them specific information about our financial networks. This news shattered what remained of their unity. Judge Blackwood rounded on Victor Hawkins, suspecting his family's political rivals. McGregor accused the Chinese merchants of betrayal. The hired guns began openly discussing withdrawal from their contracts. Eleanor watched it all through practiced eyes, noting how each new crisis forced reactions that revealed more about their operation. The gang had built something impressive, combining criminal expertise with political power and international finance. But they'd forgotten something fundamental about complex systems. The more interconnected the pieces, the more vulnerable. The whole became to cascade failure. One broken link could shatter the entire chain. Now, as their careful alliances dissolved into chaos, they were about to learn why legends sometimes survived beyond their time. Because the Shadow Rider hadn't just been waiting in the darkness. She'd been systematically dismantling their operation from within, using their own ambitions and fears as weapons against them. The true power of her legend had never been about tracking or shooting. It had been about understanding how to turn an enemy's greatest strength into their ultimate weakness. And in trying to trap her, they'd given her everything she needed to destroy them completely. The night wind carried Mercury's defiant challenge as Eleanor prepared to implement the next phase of her plan. The gang's hasty reactions to multiple threats were creating opportunities she hadn't dared hope for. Their careful security was crumbling as each faction scrambled to protect its own interests. More importantly, their rush to move the children meant they'd abandon their usual methodical approach. Mistakes would multiply, gaps would widen, and in those gaps, justice would finally find its mark. The first move came not from Eleanor, but from the night itself. A sudden wind swept through Cottonwood Basin, carrying with it the scent of approaching rain. The unexpected weather shift sent the gang's carefully positioned sentries seeking shelter, creating momentary gaps in their security. Eleanor utilized these precious seconds to relocate closer to the mine entrance, her movements silent as mountain mist. Below, the chaos was evolving into something more dangerous. Armed men taking positions, factions preparing for potential conflict. 5 years. Lieutenant Bradford's voice carried barely controlled panic. That includes the original mining claims, the water rights transfers, everything, Victor Hawkins confirmed grimly. Someone's been feeding them very specific information. Eleanor watched the implications ripple through the gathering. Each faction suddenly realized how their individual crimes connected to a larger pattern, one that was becoming visible to federal investigators. A horse's challenging whinny split the tension. Mercury again, but with a specific note, Eleanor recognized. The stallion had scented approaching riders, ones using the hidden trails she'd arranged with Maria's people. The gang's response to these multiple pressures revealed new weaknesses. Professional gunmen began quietly withdrawing from exposed positions. McGregor's original men clustered tighter around their leader. The Mexican agents moved to secure their weapons cache. Through her field glasses, Eleanor spotted Samuel Wade's signal from the ridge. 3 quick flashes indicating Marshal Cooper's men were in position, though the marshal still thought he was simply investigating military supply theft. The complexity of the situation increased as Ming Wei engaged in rapid negotiation with Lieutenant Bradford, while Rebecca Chen whispered urgently with Judge Blackwood. The Chinese merchants were offering alternative financing, trying to salvage their investment as the American banking connections crumbled. Eleanor observed Sarah Reed using the confusion to move closer to the paymaster's office, her movements suggesting purpose rather than maternal concern. The woman was playing a deeper game, one that even Eleanor hadn't fully decoded. A new sound caught her attention, the distinctive rhythm of cavalry horses approaching from the east. But something was off about their pace, their timing too, precise for a regular patrol. Through the ventilation shaft, Billy Reed's voice drifted up. "Someone's coming. Lots of people." The guard's response was automatic. "Shut your mouth, boy." But the child was right. Eleanor could sense multiple groups, converging on the basin, drawn by her carefully orchestrated flow of information. Each faction thought they were pursuing their own interests, unaware they were being maneuvered into position. The night wind shifted again, carrying fresh sounds. Wagon wheels on the northern trail, riders approaching from the west. The subtle movement of men trying to stay hidden in the rocks above. Victor Hawkins noticed too. His educated mind quickly grasped the tactical situation. "We're being surrounded," he announced quietly. The impact of his words shattered what remained of their unity. Judge Blackwood began issuing rapid orders, trying to maintain control. McGregor's men moved to defend their stolen horses. The hired guns started demanding immediate payment before the situation deteriorated further. Eleanor watched it all through practiced eyes, noting how each new pressure forced reactions that revealed more about their operation. The gang had built something impressive, combining criminal expertise with political power and international finance. But they'd forgotten something fundamental about complex systems. The more interconnected the pieces, the more vulnerable. The whole became to cascade failure. One broken link could shatter the entire chain. Movement near the mine entrance caught her attention. The guards were beginning to move the children, but their usual efficiency was compromised by the chaos around them. Small mistakes were appearing in their security. Gaps in coverage, missed signals, confused communications. Through her field glasses, Eleanor spotted more revealing details. The railway detectives were quietly coordinating with the Chinese. Merchant security forces. Lieutenant Bradford's men were preparing for a potential clash with the Mexican agents. Judge Blackwood's facade of control was cracking as he realized how many different forces were converging on his position. The complexity of their operation, which had been their greatest strength, was becoming their fatal weakness. Each faction had its own escape plans, its own priorities, its own breaking point. Sarah Reed's voice carried clearly through the ventilation shaft as she argued with Victor Hawkins about the children's transfer. But something in her tone caught Eleanor's attention, a hint of triumph carefully masked as maternal concern. The pieces shifted in Eleanor's mind, forming a new pattern. Sarah wasn't just Judge Blackwood's illegitimate daughter or Thomas Reed's wife. She was something else, entirely. Perhaps a federal agent who'd spent years building her cover, waiting for precisely this moment. The night wind carried Mercury's defiant challenge as Eleanor prepared to implement the next phase of her plan. The gang's hasty reactions to multiple threats were creating opportunities she hadn't dared hope for. Their careful security was crumbling as each faction scrambled to protect its own interests. More importantly, their rush to move the children meant they'd abandon their usual methodical approach. Mistakes would multiply, gaps would widen, and, in those gaps, justice would finally find its mark. The Shadow Rider was about to demonstrate why legends sometimes grew stronger with time, and why the most dangerous predator was one who understood both the past and the present. The gang had built their operation on careful coordination between different factions. Now, as that coordination dissolved into chaos, they were about to learn why complexity itself could become a weapon in the right hands. Justice arrived in Cottonwood Basin, not with thundering hooves or blazing guns, but with the quiet precision of a master chess player's final move. Eleanor's carefully orchestrated convergence of forces had created exactly the chaos she'd intended, transforming the gang's greatest strengths into fatal weaknesses. The first domino fell when Ming Wei's security forces made their move, not against the gang, but against Lieutenant Bradford's men. The Chinese merchants had their own score to settle with corrupt military officers who'd been interfering with their legitimate trading operations. Through her field glasses, Eleanor watched the ripple effect as Bradford's men broke formation, caught between Chinese security and the approaching railway detectives. Their confusion created the first crucial gap in the mine's defense perimeter. Victor Hawkins noticed immediately, his educated mind grasping the tactical situation. But his attempt to redirect the hired guns to cover the weakness revealed another truth. Half the professional gunmen had already quietly withdrawn, reading the shifting winds better than their employers. Sarah Reed chose that moment to show her true colors. With practiced efficiency, she produced a federal marshal's badge, using the distraction to disarm the guard nearest the children. Her years of deep cover had positioned her perfectly for this moment. Federal agents. Her voice carried command that stripped away her years of playing a submissive rancher's wife. The mine is surrounded. The revelation hit Judge Blackwood hardest. His own illegitimate daughter had been building a case against him for years, using his own paternal blind spot to gain access to his operation. Mercury's challenging scream split the night as Eleanor's arranged signal reached Maria's people. The stallion's resistance had served multiple purposes, wearing down his handlers while providing cover for the subtle movements of Eleanor's allies. Through the ventilation shaft, she heard Billy Reed's triumphant whisper to his sister, "Told you the Shadow Rider would come." But Eleanor's true mastery wasn't in the convergence of forces she'd orchestrated. It was in understanding how each faction would react when their carefully built alliances crumbled. The Mexican agents, realizing their international gun-running operation was exposed, attempted to secure their weapons cache. This brought them into direct conflict with McGregor's original men, who saw the guns as their only bargaining chip. Andrew Kincaid tried slipping away in the confusion, clutching documents that would have implicated half the territorial banking system. He made it 3 steps before Rebecca Chen's son Marcus expertly dropped him with a single thrown rock, the young man revealing skills that suggested the Chinese merchants had their own long-term plans. Judge Blackwood attempted maintaining control through sheer force of authority, not realizing his power had always been built on carefully maintained illusions. "I am a territorial judge. You cannot what?" Jonathan Drake stepped forward, a railway detective's badge catching moonlight. "Investigate how judicial decisions about rail routes mysteriously favored certain mining claims, or how supply trains suffered accidents only on specific sections of track." Eleanor watched through her field glasses as Victor Hawkins processed the situation with educated precision. The younger man's face showed the exact moment he realized the true nature of what was happening. "This wasn't about stolen horses at all," he announced into the growing chaos. "The Shadow Rider, she used our own network against us. Used our security, our communication lines, our carefully built alliances to bring in every force that had reason to move against us." "Almost right," Eleanor's voice carried from the darkness, making every head turn. She'd chosen her position carefully, utilizing the mine's acoustics to seem omnipresent. The horses were personal. She let the pause stretch meaningfully. "This is justice." The night wind shifted, carrying the sounds of movement from multiple directions. Marshal Cooper's men, the railway detectives, Sarah Reed's federal agents, Mingwei's security forces. Each group had been drawn in by their own interests, each now forming part of a noose tightening around the mine. McGregor, desperation finally breaking through his professional facade, tried rallying his original men for a fighting retreat. But Eleanor had anticipated this too. The first shot came from Samuel Wade's position on the ridge, not aimed to kill, but to shatter the lantern illuminating the mine entrance. In the sudden darkness, Mercury broke free from his handlers, creating precisely the confusion Eleanor had planned for. Through the ventilation shaft, she heard Sarah Reed moving the children to safety, using routes Eleanor had carefully mapped. The federal agent's years of cover hadn't just been about gathering evidence. She'd been positioning herself for exactly this moment. Judge Blackwood's attempt to assert authority dissolved into incoherent rage as he realized the full scope of what had happened. Every careful alliance, every political connection, every financial arrangement had been turned against him. Eleanor's voice came again from the darkness, carrying the weight of mountain stone. "Your men are surrounded, your escape routes blocked, your carefully built empire exposed to every law enforcement agency in the territory, but you still have one choice." "What choice?" Victor Hawkins demanded, his educated mind still seeking angles, options, possibilities. Surrender now, face territorial justice, or wait for federal authorities to unravel every connection, every corrupt deal, every hidden agreement. Wait, while every man here realizes that cooperation with investigators is their only hope for leniency. The impact of her words rippled through the gathered forces. Eleanor watched through her field glasses as different factions processed the implications. The hired guns were already dropping weapons, professional enough to recognize a lost cause. The Mexican agents began rapid negotiations with Sarah Reed, clearly hoping to trade information for consideration. Lieutenant Bradford tried making a break for the Northern Trail, only to find Marshal Cooper's men waiting in precisely the position Eleanor had arranged. The military officer's attempt to flee succeeded only in revealing evidence of deeper corruption, maps showing supply routes that suggested coordination with hostile Indian agents. Through it all, Eleanor maintained her invisible presence, seeming to speak from everywhere and nowhere. Each word was calculated to increase pressure on the already fracturing alliances. Every man here knows something others want kept hidden. Her voice carried precise threat. Question is, who'll be first to trade those secrets for mercy? The effect was devastating. Judge Blackwood found himself facing former allies suddenly, eager to testify about judicial corruption. McGregor's men began turning on each other, each hoping to secure better treatment through cooperation. Victor Hawkins, his educated mind grasping the inevitable, made one final attempt at negotiation. The Shadow Rider's reputation was never about violence, he called into the darkness. Surely we can arrange. You arranged my husband's death. Eleanor's voice cut through his words like a steel blade. Arranged the theft of my horses. Arranged the kidnapping of innocent children. Now I've arranged something for you, the complete dismantling of everything you've built. The night wind carried Mercury's triumphant whinny as the stallion found his way to Eleanor's position. She swung into the saddle with fluid grace, finally allowing herself to be seen against the starlit sky. The image she presented, the shadow. Rider mounted on her legendary horse, silhouetted against the moon, would be talked about for years to come. But it was her next words that truly ended the conflict. The children are safe. Your operation is exposed. Every corrupt deal, every criminal alliance, every secret agreement will be investigated by federal authorities. The only question remaining is how much each of you will suffer, and that depends entirely on who talks first. The effect was immediate and absolute. Honor among thieves dissolved in the face of mutual assured destruction. Even as Marshal Cooper's men moved in to begin arrests, different factions were already competing to offer testimony. Sarah Reed, federal badge now prominently displayed, coordinated with railway detectives to secure evidence while Chinese security forces ensured no documents mysteriously disappeared. The complexity of the gang's operation, which had been their greatest strength, now ensured that untangling it would require complete cooperation from multiple witnesses. As dawn painted the eastern sky in shades of justice, Eleanor allowed herself a moment of reflection. The Shadow Rider's legend had been built on tracking skills and frontier justice, but her greatest victory came from understanding human nature itself. The gang had built something impressive, a criminal empire masquerading as legitimate business and governance, but they'd forgotten something fundamental about power. The bigger and more complex the structure, the more vulnerable it was to the right kind of pressure applied in exactly the right place. Marshal Cooper approached as his men finished securing prisoners. You orchestrated all of this, he said quietly. Drew in every force that had reason to move against them, used their own security and communication networks to coordinate the response. The territory needed cleaning, Eleanor replied simply. Sometimes the best way to fight corruption is to let it destroy itself. The morning sun touched Cottonwood Basin as Eleanor rode toward home, Mercury moving with fluid grace beneath her. Behind them, The gang's carefully built empire was already crumbling, each arrested member rushing to testify against the others. They'd stolen her horses, threatened her community, and corrupted the very foundations of justice in the territory. In response, she'd given them exactly what they deserved, the opportunity to destroy themselves through their own greed and fear. The Shadow Rider's legend would grow from this night, but not for the reasons most would think. Her greatest weapon hadn't been guns or tracking skills or even the ability to move unseen through darkness. It had been patience, understanding, and the wisdom to know that sometimes the deadliest weapon was simply giving evil men enough rope to hang themselves. Justice had come to Cottonwood Basin not with violence, but with the quiet precision of a master strategist. And in the end, that justice would prove far more complete, far more devastating than any mere physical victory could have been. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.